Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our monthly webinar on various health issues. This month, we're going to be talking about stealth pathogens with the lovely and fantastic Kim Sperry, who seems to always have an answer to complicated health issues. You do, Kim. I'm Sharon Franzen. I work for Kim Sperry doing clinical support in San Francisco, and this particular subject is near and dear to my heart as an acupuncturist and herbalist, because oftentimes in the clinic, we get folks coming in who seem to have a very complicated health history and lots of what seem to be disparate symptoms that don't really fall into organized categories. And when you start to see things like this, sometimes the best way to look at this is to ask yourself if your patient has a stealth pathogen. And Kim is going to go all into ways to look at this, sometimes that don't even require blood labs, because sometimes laboratory work you don't have the test for some of these things. And for you acupuncturists out there, I wanted to put this into perspective for you. And that is that I oftentimes see this sort of presentation as what we would call Xiaoyong Disorder, right? It doesn't really look like a virus that comes from the outside. It doesn't really look entirely like a deficiency that comes from the inside. It's something kind of back and forth. A lot of the symptoms come and go, and they seem to be all over the place. And if you need a reminder of what Xiaoyong disorder is, it's that alternating chills and fever, the nausea and vomiting, the irritability, the underneath the rib cage pain, dry throat. There can be insomnia, a bitter taste in the mouth. All these kind of funny things that don't seem to go together. And some of our classic formulas are good for this, and some of them don't route out things from the root. So that's what Kim is going to talk to us about today. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll likely get to them at the end of the presentation. And if you think of things afterwards, you can always get in touch with either Kim or myself if you have other questions. So without further ado, here is the wonderful Kim Sperry.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful introduction, Sharon. I will tell you, I was confiding in Sharon earlier this morning. This has been a labor of love, because this is an enormous topic and quite complicated, but I'm so excited to share what I've learned with you. So first of all, I'm going to say I am not a microbiologist. I'm not claiming to treat anything, but I've got tons of clinical research that is in this presentation. So I think you'll all be very happy with the information that I'm sharing. So I wanted to start with this, because this was really good for me as well, is to sit down before fact as a little child. Be prepared to give up every preconceived notion, follow humbly wherever into whatever abysses nature leads you, or you shall learn nothing. Written by a biologist and anthropologist. I just thought that was such a great way to start today's presentation. So Sharon talked about Xiaoyong, and I'm going to say, forget stealth pathogens for now. I'm going to say that a new perspective for any healthcare issue is explore the invisible universe of microbes and include a potential for microbial burden with each and every case that you are dealing with. You can do this simply, like Sharon said, you don't have to do lab work, because there are so many microbes that haven't even been identified yet. But try to get a good idea of infection from childhood to present that a person has had. whether it's viral, bacterial, fungal, etc. Get a history of medications, especially insulin. And I'm going to share some very interesting news about insulin with you as well. Pets should always be considered, especially when you're dealing with difficult cases. You're scratching your head, I can't figure this out. Remember that pets are vectors for microbes as well, and microbial burden. Then include antimicrobial defense and stop the collateral damage that comes as a result of this. So what I did, again, this is such a complex topic. I decided to divide it into like who, what, where, when, why, and how, just to help simplify it. So I'm going to start with who and what microbes can be considered as. So first of all, I want you to know there are so many. It's considered that there are more viruses than there are stars in the universe. And there are up to 1 trillion microbial species on the earth. That's what have been identified so far. We don't know. And only a fraction of them cause disease. So I'm going to focus on just a few of them that can do us real damage, but also please keep in mind the importance of symbiosis, because microbes have been around a lot longer than we have. Generally, they're benign. And if we can work in symbiosis with them, that's going to be an advantage to us. So our microbial universe, you know, the way I understood microbes was you think of them in your guts. So you know they're inside of your body and they're around you, but we swim in a microbial universe. I think that's just the easiest way to describe it, because they by far outnumber us by about 10 to 1. And this microbial universe includes bacteria, parasites, all forms of fungus, and viruses. Even though they're not considered living, please consider them as part of this microbial universe. And we'll go into a little bit of detail on some of these specific examples, but for now, just think of bacteria, parasites, fungus, and viruses. 2 parasites that I will be talking about today are Schistosomiasis and Toxoplasma gondii. Fungus, again, this was interesting to me that ear infections, fungal ear infections are often mistaken for deafness. And there are so many different fungi out there as well. They affect our trees, they affect our vineyards. Up in Sonoma County especially, there are, I know Aspergillus is one of the types of fungus that affects the vineyards, but there are oodles. And then we have fungus in the home as well. The Aspergillus is a home fungus, but then there's also the black mold, which is considered very pathogenic, very dangerous. Men can be jock itch, women and men, finger and toenail fungus. Those are just to give you a few examples. Viruses, obviously, in the last year, we've been surrounded by conversations about viruses. But just to give you an example, here's norovirus, which is one of the main contributing factors of diarrhea, especially if it's non-bloody diarrhea. So I'm asking that you, every single case that you're working with, consider that there may be, and probably is, some type of microbial burden. And then again, pets. So whether it's pets or animals, if there are issues where you're just shaking your head, you can't figure out what's going on, ask them about their history of having pets, if they currently have pets, because pets, as well as whether they're pets or not, can be carriers of viruses, parasites, and bacteria. All have the ability to do damage, but stealth pathogens are considered especially dangerous. And this is because they have very stealthy strategies. And I'm going to talk about these strategies as well. But what happens If they're stealthy, if we're not aware that they're in our body, then we're not paying attention to the damage that they're doing, and we can become powerless to fight them once we find out that they're active in our body. Okay, so that's the who and the what. The where is to understand that these microbes live in every conceivable environment. It doesn't matter how hot or how cold or even how high or how deep. They seem to be able to survive. They are tough. So in the Antarctic ice, in the ocean, these thermal vents are the temperature of volcanic lava. They are 750 degrees Fahrenheit, and they're high up in the air as well. So in my studying, I found that Charles Lindbergh, this was about 6 years after his transatlantic flight from New York to Paris, which was a huge deal back then, way back then, is he tried his hand at aerial microbiology. And his wife, who was also an accomplished pilot, he would pass the controls over to her, and he would use what was known as a skyhook, and he would collect specimens from the air. And they found that fungus was 2 miles up in the air, and pollen. And this is way back then. Now, they're taken up into the International Space Station for the ultimate test of surviving. They're like, okay, you're tough. Let's see how tough you are. In the lab, they are finding that bacteria are withstanding Mars-like conditions. In fact, one is nicknamed Conan the bacterium because it's been said that it could survive doses of radiation thousands of times stronger than those that would kill a human. And also, they've taken microbes 30 miles up into, I believe it's the stratosphere, and they found that, well, they're not reproducing, but they're not dying. That's how tough they are and how they're everywhere. They're so hardy that researchers say they would think it would take over 1 million years in Mars-like conditions just to shrink it to 1/1,000,000th of its original size. That to me is just incredible. This, I think, was cool. Again, I've learned so much from doing this research, that cities have unique microbial fingerprints. Again, there's so much interest in microbes, and this has been going on for quite some time. But now they are, and this is just recent as well, I believe within the last 5 years, 4,700 samples were collected for metagenomic sequences for a global atlas of the urban microbial ecosystem, the first of its kind. And they found that no two cities are alike. Each reveals a unique molecular echo of the microbial species that inhabits it. And a 3-year analysis turned up previously unidentified microorganisms, including 11,000 viruses and over 1,300 new types of bacteria. And you know what I don't have in here is, and Sharon and I were talking about this the other day, that scientists can now tell by the DNA on our shoes where you live, which I think is fantastic as far as the microbes go. So that's the who, the what, the where. The when is now, because this is obviously, we're very aware of microbes. And it's also because antimicrobial resistance is considered one of the top 10 threats to global health. And that's because, remember, they're really tough and they've been around a lot longer than we have. But the ability of bacteria, parasites, viruses, and fungi to resist the medicines originally considered modern medicine's greatest successes These, we used to be able to treat infections that were once considered fatal, and now our modern successes aren't working at all. Resistance is now emerging within months after introduction of a new antibiotic, to the point that the world is running out of antibiotics. This is according to the World Health Organization report in 2017. They said a serious lack of new antibiotics under development to combat the growing threat of antimicrobial resistance. So they create new antibiotics, and it's growing shorter and shorter the period of time that it takes for these microorganisms to become resistant to whatever new medications are coming out. Especially alarming is the rapid global spread of multi and pan-resistant bacteria. So mycobacteria would fit into this category, also known as superbugs. This means pan-resistant means it's resistant to everything. Nothing can touch it. It says it causes infections that are not treatable with existing antimicrobial medicines, such as antibiotics. So if you were to look to find out, do a research on, well, how is this antimicrobial resistance developing? One is poor prevention or poor sanitation, the misuse and overuse of antibiotics. Counterfeit drugs is huge, so very poor quality counterfeit drugs. Incomplete course of treatment, and I want to focus on this too, because it takes at least 12 weeks to rid a body of infection. And if you stop your course of treatment, whether that's herbal or whether that's pharmaceutical, they end up growing back. And then this is something I really want to concentrate on, is modified microbes in the soil and in the water. So we have all of these antibiotics that we've taken, we're urinating out, it ends up in the water. They also end up in the soil. And I'm going to talk about this as well. But first, I want to share with you how they started. So this was in 1928 with Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin. And how penicillin was discovered was through fermentation and in mold. And still, for about 8,000 years, antibiotics, naturally occurring antibiotics, were produced by fermentation. Nowadays, they're not. And this blew me away once I realized this, because I kept reading it. Antimicrobial pharmaceuticals now come from genetically manipulated soil-based organisms. And it was like, genetically manipulated soil-based organisms, GMO. And I thought, oh my God, are there GMO pharmaceuticals? And it turns out the GMO pharmaceutical industry started before the agricultural industry. It started in the 1970s. I believe the first GMO pharmaceuticals came out in the 1980s, and they are mainly human growth hormone, insulin, and vaccines. So a question, and again, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to pose a question. Is it possible that even insulin resistance is coming from the fact that insulin is genetically modified? Possible. So we talked about pharmaceuticals came first, GMO pharmaceuticals that nobody is talking about. And then the agricultural industry came later. So microbes are being used. So these are genetically modified organisms, or GMO. They're being used as fertilizers, as pesticides, as biofuels, antibiotics, anti-tumor agents, immunomodulators, and enzyme inhibitors. I just want to say a quick shout out. One of the doctors that I work with was telling me how he's dealing with a lot of prostate patients that are golfers. And apparently, you know, they're picking up the pesticides in the grass on their legs. And this is leading to prostate issues. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I just want you to think about that. Okay. So these organisms that are in the soil, as well as our water, are resisting what we've genetically manipulated. And I just had to put this in here too, that when a genetically modified plant is eaten, such genes could be transferred to bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract of humans or animals. This bacteria could go on to develop resistance to that specific antibiotic. So it's possible, probably more than possible, that consuming GMOs is also contributing to this antimicrobial resistance. And certainly medications that are GMO. Here's, I thought, an interesting example in Portugal. So bacteria, the average human will reproduce about every 20 to 30 years. Bacteria reproduce every 20 minutes. So in Portugal, scientists found that in less than 500 bacterial generations, which is only 1 month, the bacteria become more resistant to being killed by immune cells and acquire the ability to cause disease. That is stealth. Keep that in mind. Here's a specific example. E. coli can adapt to better resist white blood cells while rapidly developing pathogenic type clones. Again, stealth pathogen. Mycoplasma bacteria. So here's a specific example, which can be sexually transmitted, is linked as a cofactor to AIDS pathogenesis and malignant transformation. Malignant transformation means cancer. Mycoplasma bacteria is also associated with walking pneumonia, pelvic inflammatory disease, chromosomal aberrations, that's Down syndrome as an example, Gulf War syndrome, and other unexplained and complex illnesses, including chronic fatigue syndrome, Crohn's disease, and various arthritides. Arthritides means that you have more than one arthritis at the same time, which you can just imagine the amount of pain involved. So pain, again, more than likely is, there's a contributing factor of microbes involved with pain, all pain issues. But again, it's everything. So here's another study that I thought was interesting, that the mycoplasma is a more common sexually transmitted disease than gonorrhea, a hidden epidemic, according to the CDC. Again, you hear words like hidden epidemic, think stealth pathogen. Even with mounting evidence of their pervasive and pathogenic potential, mycoplasmas still evoke the image of a group of obscure or impotent microorganisms. They look safe, but they're not. Yet they're evolutionarily advanced, and their elite status as the next generation bacterial pathogen necessitates a new paradigms and fully understanding their disease potential. Wow. I put this in here because, again, everything, and anemia and dehydration are two values that show up very commonly on a blood test. Are we just working with someone and just trying to increase their iron content or whatever it is that we need to, without taking into effect that it could be a microbe, specifically a parasite that's living off their blood? Just, again, some food for thought, something to think about. Now, speaking of parasites, Toxoplasma gondii is considered the most successful parasite on the planet. It inhabits over half of the world's population, including 50 million Americans. Each victim carries thousands of parasites, many in the brain. Toxoplasma gondii has the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. and it forces our brain cells to commit suicide. That's so scary. And again, you wonder, are any brain-related issues these days related to Toxoplasma gondii or some type of pathogen or microbe? Something to think about. Now, in Britain, they found that rats lost their fear of cats if they were infected with Toxoplasma. And the Johns Hopkins University reviewed military records and found that soldiers who developed schizophrenia were twice as likely to have Toxoplasma infection in blood samples. So Toxoplasma doesn't just come from cat feces, because obviously they didn't have kitty cats running around, but it can come from water that's not clean, and it can come from the jungle as well. Strategies like this one, again, it's a stealth strategy, have made Toxoplasma incredibly widespread and unbelievably obscure. Its obscurity is in fact a great tribute to its powers, because it's going around undetected. Okay, so I've given you the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how, and the why. So now I'm going to talk about the how. So this is how they get into our body. It can be through airborne droplets, contaminated food or water, blood and bodily fluids, because they can be sexually transmitted as well. And if this happens, infection is said to have occurred. And the Latin root meaning of infection is to put in and to spoil or stain. It can come in the form of scrapes, bites. Let's see. And I thought, you know, we tend to only think of tick bites, but there's spider bites, snake bites, fleas, mites, biting flies, mosquitoes, rats. Ugh, I can't imagine that. Snails ingest pesticides and snail poison. I will tell you that's very rare, but just wanted to put that in there, just to give you kind of a broad spectrum of how pervasive this issue is. And again, dogs, cats, and birds are another way to spread microorganisms. Okay, so they've gotten in. What do? We're dealing with the strongest, toughest, oldest things in our universe. What do? They hunker up and they huddle up and they hunker down, and they do this with biofilm. So what they do is they create this biofilm, which also happens to be antimicrobial. So medications can't get through this biofilm. They protect a protective matrix, and it allows them to just hang out with one another, share information, and go undetected. So this is part of their stealth strategy. Here are some examples of biofilm. Kitchen counter, so it can be microscopic. Dental plaque is also considered a biofilm. And they're going to be the most dangerous when they invade human cells on the form of sutures and catheters used in surgeries. I understand too that anything that's been implanted into the body, any kind of medical device, can develop biofilm. And in American hospitals alone, thousands of deaths are attributed to biofilm-related surgical site infections. Here's its biofilm-associated microorganisms are linked with several human diseases, such as native valve endocarditis and cystic fibrosis. That was new to me regarding cystic fibrosis. And about 80% of human infections affecting the gut, mouth, sex organs, lungs, heart, teeth, eyes, ear, and skin are caused by biofilm-associated microorganisms. Because they're protecting the microorganisms, infections are more resistant to traditional antimicrobial treatments, making them a serious risk. Okay, so that's one stealth strategy, but they have multiple stealth strategies. The second stealth strategy is known as molecular mimicry or immune camouflage. And this means that our body doesn't recognize it as foreign, so we don't mount an attack. Or the scarier thing is it makes our own cells look foreign, so our immune system mounts a defense against it. And this is known as autoimmune disease. And it causes inflammation. We're going to talk about how they use inflammation. They manipulate cytokines to create inflammation. And the result is if they continue to, inflammation will start to break down the different tissues of the body, including the epithelial tissues and the endothelial tissues, all with the result of being able to eventually hijack our mitochondria's DNA. Here are, again, just showing how widespread microbial burden is. Symptoms caused by pro-inflammatory cytokines can lead to atherosclerosis, increased C-reactive protein, joint damage, leaky gut, leaky blood-brain barrier, depression, anorexia, and even brain cell death. We talked about how toxoplasma makes our brain cells commit suicide. So again, anything, please start considering microbial burden. Okay, they also, here's another stealth strategy. Again, this is the how they survive in our body, is they decrease our nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is considered very important. It's produced by almost every cell of the human body. Very important for blood vessel health. It's a vasodilator, meaning it relaxes the inner muscles of your blood vessels, causing the vessels to widen. In this way, nitric oxide increases blood flow and lowers blood pressure. So my question to you is it possible that hypertension has especially hypertension you haven't been able to get under control, has a stealth pathogen association or a microbial burden associated with it? Is it possible for men with prostate issues? They're given Flomax, and the specific function of Flomax is to relax the blood vessels, relax the muscles. Is it possible that all prostate issues have a microbial burden that's associated with them? Again, something to think about. And because of cramping, I'm just going to say too, it's possible that cramping, muscle cramping that's not going away through traditional methods, is it possible that there's a microbial burden associated with it? And this is just more information on nitric oxide. In 1992, it was voted the molecule of the year by Science magazine, led to Nobel Prize winning work in neuroscience, physiology, and immunology. Is it possible, because so many people are asking for, standard process nitric oxide type of products, and we usually recommend like the fermented beets, which is an excellent source, but are we missing a larger picture that our nitric oxide is low because of a microbial burden? Here's just more information on nitric oxide. The underproduction and overproduction may impact memory and cognitive function and be involved in conditions such as depression, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's. And again, those want to look at microbial burden as well. The eventuality, and I chose this image because of a blackout. The eventuality is that these stealth pathogens will hijack our mitochondria's DNA. So we talked about earlier how they can remain quiet for who knows how long until they become active, but by then they've done so much damage using these stealth strategies that our energy is gone, our mitochondrial DNA is gone. So the easiest way to think of our mitochondria, also known as ATP, is think of it as the gasoline or the battery that runs our body. And if they take away this defense mechanism of energy, we can't fight back. We can't heal. White blood cells can't get to the site of infection or tumor, and circulation can't flow properly without adequate energy. Just like anything that runs on energy, if there isn't enough, things stop working properly and can eventually lead to a number of different disease processes. Okay, so I'm only going to talk about 2 products today because I want to go deep. So we've talked about antimicrobial resistance. We've talked about these microbes and how stealthy they can be and the different aspects that they use to remain hidden from our bodies for such a long time. So I'm going to talk about how we stop them from collateral damage, and these are time-tested remedies. So this is about nutritional therapies that are effective antimicrobials without creating microbial resistance. And I'm always going to recommend a broad spectrum approach against all pathogens. Plus, support of the collateral damage that's been done by biofilm, inflammation, lower amounts of lower amounts of nitric oxide and mitochondria. So I will tell you, I'm taking both of these products myself. I'm going to start with Artemisinin Complex. And I will tell you, I had Artemisinin Complex sitting on my shelf for a year. Never thought about taking it until I started doing research on arthritis. And not that I had arthritis, but I just thought, wow, this stuff is far more than what I've been taught. You know, you think of it, yes, it won a Nobel Peace Prize for treating malaria, but malaria isn't necessarily something that we're dealing with in this country. So what else can it be used for? Well, it turns out that it's considered a broad spectrum antimicrobial, but it's also anti-stealth and it's immune enhancing. It has antiviral, antiparasite, antibacterial, and antifungal properties, along with the drainage properties of sarsaparilla. It's old. It's been around for at least 2,000 years. It can be used, there are clinical studies, and I've got a lot of it in my arthritis webinar. So please feel free to look there too. I'll eventually have this up on my website as well. But lots and lots of clinical studies on different ways that artemisinin is used, including Lyme disease, which is considered a stealth pathogen, including periodontal disease, and that is definitely associated with microbial burden. Hepatitis, Lyme, cervical dysplasia, cervical cancer, lupus, MS, these are all clinical studies just on artemisinin. And I thought this was interesting. The antimicrobial activity of artemisinin from Artemisia annua was found to have antimicrobial capability as that of commercially available antibiotic streptomycin. The ability to inhibit microbial growth suggested that in vitro cultured Artemisia annua could be an alternative for the production of these potent antimicrobial drugs. The scientists are looking for other things because, again, we're running out of antibiotics. We need things that are going to be just as effective, but are resistant to these microbes. Microbes aren't resistant to them. Here's an interesting clinical study how artemisinin is used to inhibit Toxoplasma gondii. Remember, this is the most successful parasite on the planet. And it mentions that it interrupts the lytic cycle or the reproductive cycle of parasites. It's a biofilm preventer and disruptor. So again, this is going to stop the stealth strategy of whatever microbe it is that we're dealing with. It interrupts the stages of development, adhesion, maturation, and detachment. That's huge. We talked about cytokines and how cytokines are manipulated to create inflammation. And artemisinin reduces the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Very important. It helps to regulate our immune system. Again, our immune piece and the inflammation piece are adversely affected by stealth pathogens. It increases nitric oxide. It actually mimics nitric oxide. Very important, because remember that nitric oxide has been reduced as a result of the stealth pathogen. Toxoplasma gondii, it very good for that as well. What I want to say that differentiates MediHerb from other brands, because if you were to look online, yes, you'd see a lot of sweet wormwood products, and they'll say artemisinin instead of sweet wormwood, but you have to make sure that you're guaranteed of getting the active ingredient of artemisinin. Most products are either their extraction process will destroy artemisinin, or they're just giving you a dried powdered herb of sweet wormwood that doesn't contain artemisinin. And I put this in here too. I put the nutrition label because artemisinin is such a minute part of sweet wormwood. It's 1/2 of 1%. It takes a long time for MediHerb to get 40 milligrams of artemisinin in 1 tablet of Artemisinin Complex. And the other thing too is MediHerb, and this is true for the tablets as well as the liquid extracts, is they use ethanol alcohol rather than methanol or acetate, which are the most common in most herbal companies. They contain toxic residues, and ethanol does not. In addition, MediHerb always does extra lab testing to make sure that there are no toxic residues. The safety of artemisinin is wonderful. Even in high doses prescribed, artemisinin and its derivatives are regarded as quite safe. No serious adverse events or severe significant toxicity has been reported from clinical trials. You can use a fair amount of it. Up when you're dealing with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, you can take up to about 12 tablets a day. The average is going to be 6. I personally take a total of 6 daily. And I see up there, I see the equivalent is up to 16 tablets a day. You're going to find that most people never have to use that many. I personally take 6 a day, and I feel so strong on Artemisinin Complex. I'm going to go back for just a minute. Typically, you use this 1 week on and 1 week off. And again, you want to do it for bare minimum 12 weeks. My recommendation would be to do it for 16 weeks to make sure that you are ridding the microbial burden. Remember, if you stop too soon, they're just going to grow back. Okay, if you're white knuckling it through the 1 week off of Artemisinin Complex, consider adding Myrrh Forte. And there are different ways of looking at this. I am not talking about a stealth pathogen protocol that a MediHerb mentions. I am talking about taking this every single day in a low dose. And this would be taking 2 daily, first thing in the morning, it's better on an empty stomach, of Myrrh Forte. So I'm taking Myrrh Forte 2 daily every single day. And you can take that long-term for as long as you want. 2 tablets will give you 1 gram of the myrrh resin. And then I take the Artemisinin Complex, 6 tablets per day, 1 week on and 1 week off. Okay, so microbes are old and they're tough. Well, so is myrrh. Myrrh goes back to the 5th century. It's tough. It grows in tough, dry, desolate conditions that can even grow out of rock. It's old. It's also it's tough, it's old, and it's sacred. So Greek soldiers always carried myrrh because it was antibacterial, anti-inflammatory. They got wounded, they used myrrh. But oh well, if they died for any reason, they could use myrrh to embalm the body and consecrate the dead bodies. It is still used in sacred ceremonies as a form of incense. So here's a parasite we talked about earlier. Schistosomiasis affected over 200 million people in 74 countries and territories worldwide, according to the World Health Organization, causing several chronic complications. It's incriminated to predispose or accompany hepatitis. So in Egypt, schistosomiasis is a big health problem. And I thought I put this study in here because, again, it remains a health problem in Egypt despite continuous control efforts. That control is coming from antimicrobials. And it's saying that they're not working or not enough. And that's why they decided to try myrrh. And guess what they found? The cure rate after 3 months of being on myrrh, and it is, obviously was not, it killed 97.4%. That's fantastic. Here is the clinical study that it potentially kills non-growing bacteria. I was mentioning mycobacteria, which is pan-resistant, which means nothing can touch it. This is because of persister cells. Persister cells are subpopulations of cells that resist treatment and become antimicrobial tolerant by changing to a state of dormancy or quiescence. Again, that's stealthy. Persisters are dormant, non-dividing cells that exhibit multi-drug tolerance and survive treatment by all known, except myrrh. Myrrh oil has the potential to be commercially viable antibiotic that kills persister cells and causes no resistance development. This is a rare example of an antibiotic that can preferentially kill non-growing bacteria. It addresses all aspects of microbial burden, so it's a beautiful companion to use with Artemisinin Complex. Especially good for any mouth ulcers, gingivitis, canker sores, periodontal disease, periodontitis. Also, clinical studies on IBS, Crohn's, colitis, SIBO, and SIFO. Supports a healthy intestinal environment by cleansing the lower GI tract. Antifungal, including aspergillus, so that's one of the molds that's in the vineyards and in our home. This is just another study showing the strong antimicrobial activity of myrrh. Inhibits dental plaque. Remember, a common biofilm is dental plaque. So this is going to disrupt the stealth strategy of microbes. So it stops biofilm. And I wanted to, this is a very important piece, is a lot of the clinical studies are done with the essential oil of myrrh, that it markedly inhibited the Staph aureus biofilm formation. And the essential oil of myrrh was effective against Staph aureus virulence, the most dangerous of all staph bacteria. This I found out straight from the horse's mouth, which is the clinical team of MediUrban Standard Process, that the myrrh forte is made of the resin of myrrh bark, which is a complex of many different terpenes. Terpenes, just so you know, are the essential oils. Combined together with other plant compounds, it takes 90% ethanol alcohol to be able to pull all of the important active ingredients out of myrrh. She said, I am confident that it is full of myrrh essential oil. just a few miscellaneous pieces about myrrh. Frankincense and myrrh in traditional Chinese medicine work beautifully together. Anti-inflammatory, remember, inflammation is a stealth strategy. So it's going to be very good for any inflammation. This is a clinical study just backing that up. And it regulates cytokines. Remember, the stealth strategy of microbes is to damage or to manipulate our cytokines. This helps regulate them. It activates our mitochondrial pathway. Very, very important to get that energy, that ATP up and running to help protect our bodies. In the different clinical studies, it has a dose-dependent function. They recommend 1 to 15 grams to be adequate. And again, this is where I came up with taking 2 tablets every single day. There are, and I'll talk about the safety, 2 tablets every day will give you 1 gram of myrrh resin. No more than 8 tablets daily is needed. If you're going that high, you actually need to change how you're taking it. You can't take that every day at high amounts. So again, my recommendation is if you're just new to myrrh forte and artemisinin, start with only 2 myrrh forte on an empty stomach. So this is what I'm doing. I take 6 daily of artemisinin, and I'd say the bare minimum of artemisinin would be 4 daily, 1 week on and 1 week off. And you want to repeat that cycle for 4 months. Every day, take 2 myrrh forte first thing in the morning. You do not need to go off of it. And this combination will provide constant antimicrobial support, but is also going to disrupt that stealth strategy that they're using. It's considered safe. Both are considered very safe. There are no known contraindications. It may reduce blood sugar, so check with anyone who's on insulin. And again, remember that insulin these days is genetically modified. Insulin or diabetic medications, it's obviously not to be used during pregnancy. We don't typically recommend these herbs to be used during pregnancy, especially the first trimester. And I put this in, this is the last slide, because if you go on standardprocess.com, you do need to sign into the website before you can type in the search box. But if you type in the search box, I think I just typed in myrrh. You go underneath the photo of the myrrh and you'll see all of the supporting clinical information. And this is the one that will go into detail if you decide to take much higher amounts of the Artemisinin complex and the myrrh forte. And I believe that's it for now. And the reason why I'm stopping now is this topic is so broad that this is going to become a mini series. There's more to come as far as other products that can be used, but if you do nothing else, please take away from this the importance of using Artemisinin, #1. And then if you want to add one other product, I would add the myrrh forte. And that is all that I have for you.
Well, it's probably good that you stopped there too, Kim, because by now I'm sure we're all like, ew. It's everywhere.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a good thing that we have the answers to this because it's so prevalent, right?
Yeah, exciting.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody want to jump in there and ask some questions? We still have a couple of minutes left. If so, feel free to unmute yourself and ask us. I myself thought that the whole thing about, constricting the blood vessels, that was something I hadn't really thought of before until we talked about high blood pressure the other day.
Right.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah. And that's why I'm encouraging you to everything. Just consider microbial burden.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question here. Did you say 4 to 6 months for the artemisinin?
I would say 3 to 4 months. I would say 4 months to be on the safe side.
Well, and that was interesting, right? Like oftentimes we're giving, if we're given rounds of antibiotics, that's, 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks total, but you're saying 12 weeks for anything.
Yes.
And so that includes herbs. So that's 3 months minimum.
3 months minimum, bare minimum.
Yeah.
I would go for, I don't know if I'm ever going to go off of artemisinin. I just feel so good on it. The other thing too, I want to say is that MediHerb talks about doing a critter cleanse once a year. And we'll get into that in future webinars as well. But that means that, we're constantly going to be exposed to these different types of microbes. So don't just take it for 4 months and then stop.
Right.
Consider doing a critter cleanse once a year.
And then, okay, we have a couple other questions. Can artemisinin improve cognitive impairment too, especially if they're caused by bugs in the brain?
Yes, and I would say artemisinin and myrrh, because both stop collateral damage, and it's possible that it's Toxoplasma gondii, considering that it's so stealthy.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Ask people if they have cats. And then Erica would like to know, can these products be taken while taking other products?
Sure. In fact, they can be taken with medications as well, which is great. The Artemisinin Complex is better with a little bit of food on the stomach, and Myrrh Forte is better taken on an empty stomach.
And as you said, if somebody's taking insulin, to be careful of the myrrh, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Although, sometimes there's that fork in the road, like which would you rather take?
Exactly. Now that it's genetically modified as well. The other thing I want to say is that what got me started on this whole thing was creating arthritis protocols, which I talk about in my arthritis webinar, because I used artemisinin because I didn't really know about myrrh that much back then. But it was artemisinin, beta-col, calcifood wafers, and this is embarrassing, but Boswellia complex. And again, Boswellia and myrrh work really well together. Right. But absolutely, it can be taken. And that's what I'm trying to get you all to start thinking is, oh, wow, if I've got somebody on a protocol and they're doing okay, I wonder if I just add one product that's going to address microbial burden, because every one of us have some kind of microbial burden going on. Is that going to make it even better? So yes, it certainly can be taken along with other products.
Until recently, I always used to ask myself, can this person do well with the 21-day cleanse? And now my question is, can this person do well with a, stealth pathogen type of treatment?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Just to wipe the slate clean, because sometimes we don't know what's underlying.
Exactly.
There is another question. More like of a comment. Studies suggest cystic fibrosis may be caused by microbes.
Absolutely. I mentioned cystic fibrosis. Yeah.
Erica, the critter cleanse is pretty much what we're talking about. There's a, which we'll get into in future webinars, but there's a more broad and expansive protocol that includes not only the myrrh fort and the artemisinin complex, but also Viranon and echinacea. That's part of a at least 6-round cycle, 2-week cycle of herbs. So that's 12 weeks as well, the critter cleanse.
If you go to standardprocess.com and you just type in myrrh after you sign in, type in myrrh, you'll see that study, and that's a digital asset that we have. Just keep scrolling down and it gives you the entire stealth pathogen protocol or critter cleanse.
Yeah, and Erica, if you'd like to talk to me about it further, I'd be happy to talk to you on the phone. So,
yeah, she's really good.
Yeah, I really love.
I'm talking about Sharon.
I really love applying
She's
this too.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to be working with you.
So sweet, Kim. And then, Kim, could you repeat your protocol for arthritis?
Okay, I use 6 calcifood wafers, and calcifood, just so you know, we've been taught that it's great for broken bones, which it is. It happens to be fantastic for hair, skin, and fingernails as well as arthritis. So it is 6 calcifood wafers a day, 6 beta-col or any kind of a liver product. So right now I'm using Livoplex because I'm just experimenting. 6 boswellia, 6 artemisinin, 6 beta-col, and there's one other product that I mentioned earlier that I just forgot. If whoever it is, I'd be happy to email that arthritis protocol. What is it? Boswellia, liver support, artemisinin. Oh, calcifood wafers.
Yeah.
Yes, calcifood wafers.
Yeah, you
Fantastic.
got it all.
And again, I'm recommending this to anybody who has a pet. Speaking of pets, calcifood wafers are fantastic for teeth of your not only our own teeth, but our animals' teeth as well. Chew it up, which is good for you. Make a paste out of it, put it on your fingers or put it in the cat's bowl or the dog's bowl. That is so good for them. My cat gets at least 2 calcifood wafers a day.
Well, I just snuck some into my very picky kitty's cat food bowl the other day, and she ate it all. Didn't have to chew it up, didn't hardly have to crumble it, and she is super picky.
Oh, fantastic. Yes.
Might be a nice thing to just sample out to your patients. Lots of our patients have pets. Sample it out. Say, hey, try this with your dog or cat. See if they like it.
Yeah. As my friend said, if you want to avoid ghastly dental bills, and why not? Who wouldn't want to avoid that? Give them calcifood.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Sort of out of time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Right. Well, everybody knows where to find more information. Call us, email us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you,
so
Sharon.
much, Kim.